I just want to start this off today telling what a pleasure it is to have Michael Ian Kaye as our presenter and our speaker. I've known Michael for longer than I would like to admit in public. And he is, I think, the most creative guy on this planet, and for a long time, not just in a little while. Two formalities. He's the Chief Design Officer and Principal at SYLVAIN, and he drives bold ideas and meticulous craft, and he provides clear direction in that position, ambitious vision, and cultural insights, and that his teams all possess. If you want to be with him, you got to be there. He's worked on brands across categories from Target to Microsoft to Marriott, Diageo, Oscar, IBM, Wired, Calvin Klein. I'm going to bore you to death with all of these things, but the Fashion Week, IMG, American Express, he has cultural insights like nobody I know in America, and he works in really dynamic marketing platforms with innovation, creative executions that ground brands and culture and moving them forward. He's so well known for a lot of his iconic designs for Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. If you've ever read that book, if you haven't, you should. And or perhaps you know of Fight Club, which both of those have left indelible impressions on American culture. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, Michael Ian Kaye is a real treasure in America when it comes to creative work. And he's a person you guys should be around and ask a lot of questions of. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Hank. One, flattered by the introduction. I'm okay to hang around. I thought that, one, I wanted to kind of start today just kind of saying it's a little wonky to be presenting kind of work, commercial work that drives businesses, things that like that on a day when we really should be focusing on humanity kind of and how we can help people better heal. It's kind of a rough day. It's been a rough 2 weeks, frankly, 3 weeks, just terms of what's going on in the world. And so I just want you to know that it's on my mind, and it's understandable that it's on everybody's mind. And I don't like it that it's business as usual, but I also want to be able to connect to you guys. And this was a moment that was set up to do that. So we're going to move forward, but I do want to acknowledge that there are more important things than me talking about work that are going on in the world. And thanks for spending some time with me today. And I just wanted to say that, frankly. I think that, you know, as was put out in kind of the release and kind of how this talk was talked about, this idea was meant to talk about, to focus on how, like, my initial intention of the talk was to focus on how changes in the media landscape has influenced how we as creatives need to evolve our work more. So this notion of more flexibility, more dynamism, more inclusivity, more focus and relevance. And so we're going to talk about that. But one of the things that happened is, as I was putting this talk together, I realized that I'm not really a media expert. I don't have kind of a body of work that fully demonstrates how everything kind of aligns and how we're optimizing things in this space and doing this for things in that space. And I can't really provide this one-size-fits-all magic cure to solve for creating and making for the future. It's something that has kind of come naturally to me, and it comes naturally to me because the thing that I do, or the thing that I have, is just this curiosity, conviction, and passion. I have this curiosity that makes me want to better understand the world, and as culture makers, kind of, or who are the culture makers, and kind of who are the culture makers, who are doing the things that are important. All that stuff really matters to me. I'm curious about how our ideas inform and shape communities and what opportunities technology can provide us to make differently. And I mean, make differently, not make the same thing over and over again, but define processes that work with the world, that work with culture, that work with technology to do things in a different way. And I have conviction of craft. The tools that we have, I value. I value image makers, I value typography, I value the craft of the things that we put out into the world. And I also have this conviction of concept. I want to make sure that the ideas have meaning and resonate. I'm not about putting kind of decoration in the world. I'm not about making for the sake of making. I'm making from it's really kind of simple. Everything that we touch is a reflection of ourselves. Everything that we put out into the world can be tracked back to us. And this, I don't know, I find it a responsibility. And it's not that I'm making high art, right? It's not that what I'm doing is no matter what it is, it's super important that kind of the things that I'm doing resonate and help brands, help people. I have this passion for doing good, and a passion for doing work that matters for brands, but more importantly for society and culture. I'm going to share my screen a little bit. Any questions so far? Like, that was just like a little spiel, but it's true. Good. Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see nothing? You should see nothingness.
Yes.
The lovely nothingness. So this passion around doing good, I don't mean like everything that I do has some philanthropic implication or some kind of higher purpose that manifests itself in charity or kind of progress in that sort of way. But yet I do want to do that. And I do have the opportunity to do that. But I think that what we do as designers, makers, creators, is we have the ability not only to change the way businesses work, and how they work, how they operate, but also what they put out into the world, having connections with people, making people smile, making people think, making people look at something a little bit differently. And that's goodness, that's bringing good into the world. And that is kind of what I've always looked for in my work. I'm fortunate in that I recently moved to a company like SYLVAIN, where progress creates impact and impact drives business. We work on a broad range of clients ranging from Netflix to the New York Times, MoMA, Nike, Kate Spade. And with all of those projects, we're defining brand strategies, we're innovating new products, new ideas, and we're putting design and communications out into the world in a different way. We're trying to make sure that meaning that I spoke about, that truly understanding of an audience, how ideas go out into the world are, he wants me to look there so you're not looking at the top of my head, sorry, are potent, drive business. I'm not afraid of doing business, but I want to make sure that for good, as I say, that it is taking things and moving them farther. The early part of my career, as Hank mentioned, I spent a lot of time in book jackets and creating these singular objects. These singular objects, although seemingly very simple, had multiple inputs. They had the intended audience, they had the intended retail outlet, and then they had manuscripts that were piled this high. And all of these inputs needed to be synthesized into these singular artifacts that then went into bookstores and inspired people to pick them up. And then upon picking them up, reading them, and then those ideas back out into the world again. And so this notion of taking kind of this vast multiplicity of inputs, bringing it to a single thought, and then bringing it back out are the things that I think about in my work. And what becomes interesting is how these things then become kind of these icons, they were almost like logos that represented these authors or represented these books, and they went back out into culture. And it's funny because the tipping point, if you haven't read it, is really about the contagiousness of ideas and how trends spread. And it's very, very much how we as creators need to be thinking about how our work connects with people and then is disseminated kind of more broadly through their lenses. What's interesting is, here's case in point. I don't know whether you all know the book Fight Club, which was a movie, and it was a very violent movie and a very violent book. But this notion of using soap, which does come out of the content of the book, something that's very clean, to speak about violence, was really the idea that drove this book cover, which then drove this movie poster, which I had nothing to do with, except for the fact that I sued Sony because they basically ripped me off. Even the typography is similar. And then, there are shoe stores, there's graffiti, there's kind of this whole culture that surrounds this that had nothing to do with, but everything to do with taking kind of those larger inputs, bringing it down to a singular thought, putting that out into the world and seeing how the world amplifies that. This notion of multiple inputs being reduced and then going out. I worked with Kate and Andy Spade a long time ago when they were still part of the business to create a mark that represented their brand. When they approached me, it was much more about this notion of we need to prevent bags from being counterfeited. We think we want a monogram. Maybe it's a flower. And just those kind of simple inputs and understanding the brand brought me to something that was iconic. It was a monogram. It was a flower. And what they thought they were doing just in creating this simple gesture that would represent or kind of prevent counterfeiting actually became kind of the fodder for kind of a whole collection of bags. And what's funny is that these aren't the bags, these are an illustration that somebody did of the bags 30 years later. But what really came from this is a world of kind of this mark being conceived of in kind of this reduced down to the singular thought and then built back out so that it has these ripple effects in culture. Singularity, kind of designing for the essence of something, and this notion of craft. It's bizarre. This is like a very small project that I took on for what was an antique gallery in in New York on 10th Street. And actually, it was like an antique store. And what we helped do is transition them to gallery. Their specialty was in Art Deco. Everything was museum quality. And there was a craft and both a modernity, but a need to lean back and look backwards. So we created this simple mark, and you see in the O, it almost looks like a really fine screw on a piece of furniture. And then all of the collateral that we made just had this beautiful integrity to it. And one mark spawned kind of catalogs and posters and all of the things that kind of, you know, an old school and yeah. Whoops, hello?
You went offline for a second. Repeat what you just said.
Where did I stop?
Right around, I think you had just pulled this up, the pictures.
Oh, these were like posters that we had made. And it's not like the work itself had huge influence on culture, but it actually did change the way this brand operated. And bizarrely, as a design case study, it was one of the most shared design case studies that all of a sudden people started photographing their work this way. So even when we're not intending it to impact culture, within smaller cultures, our work does that. I'm gonna go quicker too. A simple mark, right? New York Fashion Week. How do we take all that is New York Fashion Week and boil it down into something that are probably 9 gestures on a page? The simplicity of the lines, kind of the diagonal lines, remind you of kind of the street crossing. The kind of articulated serifs are kind of the nuance of fashion, right? And then the notion that it goes out into the world and creates so many impressions, so many ways in which this singular thought that has multiple inputs comes back out and impacts in larger ways. I'm gonna just play this for a second. This was a graphics package that we did for an AIGA conference. And when the AIGA came to us, they said, the AIGA is more than just graphic design. We have, you know, digital thinkers, we have product designers, we're not just graphic arts. So what we did was we created a design system that was a inclusive design system with multiple components, each crafted to represent the idea of a different discipline. And then this cube that is the AIGA is this magnet that continually draws all of these different influences or different makers together. And we created a typographic language that really was dynamic. It didn't matter what configuration these letters were in the same way it didn't matter what discipline you came from or how you expressed yourself. It really was about dynamism and expression, and came to life just both gorgeously in print and then allowed itself to just, I don't know, really kind of dynamically feel like a singular thought, yet it's showing up in so many ways. And this is kind of interesting because it also is about, we know now that our designs cannot always be static. There are mediums and media that really require or can be enhanced through motion and a added sense of kind of typographic and image kind of, motion, for lack of a better word. So this is also the beginning of that for me, trying to make sure that we weren't creating just singularly, that we were opening up our aperture to include all of these things in our approach to designing. Shortly thereafter, New York, NYXL, New York Excelsior, we got to design the identity for New York's first professional video gaming thing for the Overwatch League. And what was super cool about this, I'm going backwards, I think. Whoops. Oh yeah, there it is. What was super cool about this is that most of the teams had these it was like the San Francisco Dragons, or like they had these kind of like very familiar like characters or creatures. And we were like, we don't need no animals. New York is different. New York is fashion and style, and we're bold, and we're going to create an identity that expresses that. And it's also cool because your identity is on like skins for game characters, and you see it move right there, and it comes to life again in so many different ways. So this notion of it's not a mark, it's not a system, it's something that gives the opportunity for things to express themselves and connect to people in so many different platforms, so many different mediums. And it just kind of, it lives on beyond what you as the creator actually thought possible, what you had intended it to do. I have spent a good part of my time working on Target. They were a client where I used to work. I probably spent 10 years working with them, and I actually worked with them kind of migrating from physical to digital. The work that we started out doing was very two-dimensional billboards, and then we moved into broadcast and social, and the whole media landscape kind of changed. And I worked with them on store openings and kind of their first New York store opening, which was in Harlem, and developing a brand language that was both rooted in Blue Note kind of typography, but yet had New Yorker like illustrations and the optimism of Target. And what was cool about this is that there was very few kind of digital things, but the way in which it expressed itself through inclusivity, through kind of all of the different things coming together to create the system was super kind of dynamic and really reflected the texture of both Harlem and New York. Many years later, I helped them launch their downtown store. And what the world had kind of moved on, digital and dynamism and the things that I'm talking about became more kind of necessary for the things that we make. And I love this actually. We did this campaign that came up in so many different ways in both digital, but it wasn't a reflection of the culture. It was actually a reflection of New York. It took its reference from subway signage and subway maps, and even its language like AAA Battery Park, Bowling Green Juice, Fine Chinatown. All of this copy was meant to not only reflect an insight into New York, but an understanding of all the things that you get at a Target. And it's, let's see. So you can see kind of on the left, the only motion, the only movement that was part of the Harlem campaign was the first New York City subway wrapped train. And then on the right, this is just some of the on-screen graphics that we programmed downtown at all of the digital kiosks. So 2 store openings, equally as dynamic, but the way of creating and how we create and what we create are now quite different. So I've taken you through a little bit of graphic design. I've taken you through a little bit of kind of communications. Now I'm going to take you through some experiential stuff. So kind of leaving the 2D to the 3D. And Target came to us and they wanted a way in which they could speak from a fashion point of view about their in-house brands. And they wanted to do it as an experience ideally just for fashion influencers, but New York more broadly. And at the time that this happened, this was actually in 2009, so a while ago, it was when the Standard Hotel actually went up downtown. And this is a little article from New York Magazine, where it talks about the kind of way in which people were exposing themselves to the walk through the glass windows on the south side of the High Line to people who were walking on the High Line, and people were having sex in the windows, and it was a whole scandal. And so we thought, wow, that's actually an amazing opportunity. Wouldn't it be great if we used that whole South Side and did something like this as a fashion show? So that was a lot. No, I mean, it was one of my favorite things I've ever kind of made or participated in making. And actually, I'm going to pause here for a second because I think it's also important that I recognize that I did not make all of these things by myself. I was a designer for those book jackets. I helped design some of the things you've seen, but things like this and some of the more broader work, I've either served as an art director, a creative director, or an executive creative director on, and I've run multiple teams creating multiple concepts, and these things don't happen as a solo kind of venture. And I think as I was thinking about this conversation around singularity to multiplicity, I also think it's kind of a reflection of my growth as a creative, as an individual practitioner, kind of focusing on singular book jackets, but then how I've built my career, beginning to work with teams and people, and then beginning to curate teams and curate multiple teams all in the guise of making kind of the things that I want to make for brands. And so it's very, very important to me that although I won't kind of recognize by name, that there are hundreds of people that made the thing that you just saw, some of whom I don't even know. And these things all take kind of both vision, craft, concept, as I say, and dedication, or conviction, excuse me, that's where I wanted to go. I mean, what would a presentation be without Beyonce? And it's very funny, although not in here, Beyonce was a client of mine at some point. I just thought about this. I designed a typeface for Beyonce and her mom way back when. Anyhow, but that's not why she's here.
I got hot sauce in my bag, swag. I got hot sauce in my bag, swag. I got hot sauce in my bag, swag.
I talk a lot about kind of this culture kind of into singularity and back out into multiplicity. And one of the great opportunities I got was to work with Target in helping them kind of position fashion and style as core to who they are. And we came up with this platform called Target Style, where we looked out into the world at kind of where were the things that were popping, whether they were cats on Insta, famous cats on Insta, or Beyonce's hot sauce in her bag. And we created these little moments through the lens of all Target product. And we called it Target Style. And one kind of meme-like thing became many things. And each one had its own kind of reference point, its own story, whether it was around beauty, home, fashion, all of the things, the Roomba, all of the things that Target makes and sells. And we created this whole platform called Target Style, which was, yes, it was meant, there were 30-second spots, there were 60-second spots, but there were also these little bite-sized morsels that would go out into culture. And it was meant to reflect kind of the idea of what it's like to go into a Target and to see one thing over here and continually be inspired. Whoops, is that right?
I'll get you there. To the dicky 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 to do. This is my town. If you don't know now, you know. Do that thing that you do. I'll show you a new world. Check out the dicky 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 to do. Now, how am I gonna leave? I've been moving like this since I was downtown. I'm fading in the youth. Are you ready to take it to footloose? I'm a flippity flop, that clickety clop. Staying up tonight, I won't need. By now, I figured it out. I'll give you more than you ever need. I'll get you dancing to the dicky 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 to do. This is my town. If you don't know now, you know. Do that thing that you do. I'll show you a new move. Check out the dicky 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 to do.
So also, like, you have to kind of, contextualize that work for a much broader audience and than Maison Girard, right? And so the things that we think about, the popness, the poptimism with which that brand needs to express itself to connect more broadly is quite different than the singular focus of a Maison Girard or some of those earlier book jackets. And I love kind of that play. I love kind of this notion of how do you make something so singular and special that kind of goes out this way, but how do you also make something that's special for so many and connects more broadly? And those are the I don't know, the things for me that just kind of infiltrate my mind, help me solve brand problems. I think that, yeah. And what's super cool is this other project that I did for Target, where it's part of the Target Style campaign, but what we did was we actually recreated 20 images from Vogue's history, from famous fashion photographers. And we did it all with Target product. And incorporated in there was, this is Verushka, who you probably don't know, but one of the most famous supermodels from the 60s, 70s. And what's funny is she's next to Aman Haman, who was like, this was one of her third, fourth campaigns at the time, who was really busted out as kind of one of the new supermodels. And so the context of actually doing this in Vogue magazine and creating these really elevated images, you can see this is an old Vogue illustration, and this was the photograph that we actually recreated. And what was cool also about this is that we used image recognition technology with Shazam, so you could actually Shazam the picture, and everything that we used from a product point of view could be purchased. A few more images from that. I'm just going to play, actually, I'm not just going to play. So Target and their connection to music has always been kind of, a big driver for them, not only for what they sell, but for the music that they incorporate into their communications. And we were asked to create a spot for the Grammys, a 3-minute spot that brought to life all of the things we've been talking about. And we kind of thought about this notion of kind of disparate things coming together, kind of, again, mimicking that notion of shopping in a Target store. So the idea of bringing two things together to create something new is really what drove this. And really, I don't know whether you all know Carly Rae Jepsen or whether you know Lil Yachty, but they never, it's like kind of really not oft mentioned in the same kind of sentence, but we actually brought them into a Target store and created, not a real Target store, and created a new remake of a song. So what was so cool about this was that the next day in the New York Times, they cited this 3-minute commercial as one of the best performances in the Grammys. So again, kind of big ambition, lots of cultural inputs, singular thought, a shit ton of people building it out and layering that thought, and then putting it out into the world. And the next day you're in the New York Times. So also had the good fortune of working with Zed and Maren Morris to launch their song the next year on the Grammys, only to make kind of a #1 hit. So I'm not gonna, I know you're probably all tired and very familiar with that song, but just the notion of being able to bring these two people together, create a performance for Target on the Grammys, and knowing that performance launched that song to be a #1 hit for however many weeks, is again this notion of big to small to big. And then all those little bigs get bigger and bigger. So I don't know, we play an important part. And then now I'm back to 20 years after I created that Kate Spade logo, which is no longer their logo, by the way. They came back, and this is now me at SYLVAIN. And I'm now working with them again. We just did their spring campaign, which didn't have the flower logo icon, but really celebrated the optimism. Whoops, wait, I think that, hold on. Oh, whatever. The optimism, the iconic nature of the brand. There was a, maybe it's coming up, sorry. And brought it to life in New York, across all social media platforms. We recorded a Rolling Stones song, created all this work that inspired. So there's all these layers now to these campaigns that I'm actually making that are all connected by a single thread. There was a 30-second spot in there, but I think I passed it. And then design work, back. So kind of excited to put this work out into the world for Major League Soccer. It's for kind of this league between, they had, Major League Soccer had the professional league, and then they had this MLS Next, which was this high school league. They asked us to create something as a bridge, to name a brand and create this brand that people wanted to be a part of as they were migrating from high school and before they were ready for the professionals. And so we created MLS Next Pro, which takes some of its kind of, that little badge that you see here. Oops, sorry. This little badge is the MLS logo. But what we did was we created this typeface, and this typeface, which has been criticized as being both beautiful and ugly, was meant to mimic the way players move on the field, on the pitch. And so there were so many positions. And so this notion of a singular identity, a singular mark that actually has all of these ways of expressing itself to create things like this. And this. And now is even on the back of the young Beckham. So again, outputs, inputs, singularity, multiplicity, out, multiplied. It is this magic, the potential that we have to influence, and the understanding of all of the ways in which we put these things out into the world really do matter. Oh, and also, it's nice to get a little design love every once in a while, right? So this is a little bit from It's Nice That. I believe, 2 more projects. I'll go quickly. So ESPN had a platform called The Undefeated. And The Undefeated is about Black athletes and culture. The Undefeated team and ESPN felt that given the time, that there was opportunity for The Undefeated to be about more, for The Undefeated not to only be about Black and sports and culture, but for it to be about Black and culture. We worked with the team, we did a lot of research, The undefeated was not a name that was ownable in all the channels that they needed to own it, so it needed to be renamed. There was an insight that came through lots of conversations around kind of Blackness and culture, and that one, Blackness is not a monolith, that it's not a singular thing, and that a lot of kind of the ways in which kind of Black people are defined is through their intersections, through the many connection points of different things in their lives. And so we renamed the undefeated into the Andscape. And the Andscape, this is actually a mood board that we created to demonstrate the expansiveness of the identity that we wanted to build. We actually created some initial sketches of this notion of kind of movement and not trying to create a singular experience. We then built out this idea of and with these characters that move and define itself through different weights and crazy back and forthness. And just the beauty of the movement and the weights was meant to mimic kind of both this intersectionality, but the uniqueness and the lack of monolithness, if you will. And it took in mind kind of all of the media kind of opportunities, so how it could show up in different places and speak to things that have both kind of substantive meaning and things that are light and funny, and to do it all with one brand voice. And we created a spot, I believe.
Black is not to be told.
It is to unfold.
It is to unfold
Unravel.
and travel
Across the breadth.
stretching,
And pulling.
threading,
And heading to places you ain't never
you
seen.
ain't never seen.
Places you ain't never
And
seen.
that's just off
And
top.
that's just off top. It's ever in motion and multitude.
Both the key and the lock.
It is involved and evolving.
Ingenious and in progress.
Blackness in full and at
And
home.
at home.
In the Andscape.
So super proud to have been part of that project for many, many reasons, and know that the things that we've made and the tools that we've given this brand will allow them to express themselves uniquely, as I said, not only just in this kind of moment in time, but I believe it actually has longevity, and it can actually create more impact over time than these earlier singular thoughts. And I'm just going to wrap kind of today up by saying that kind of the singularity of which I speak doesn't always translate into multiplicity unless we're cognizant of the things that we want to make it do, or the things that it can do. And I'm ending this talk the way I began this talk, with a singular book, a photographer who photographs, does portraits, open studio portraits of individuals. He said, I wanted to make a book. I post this thing on Instagram. It says, hello, I will be in studio shooting portraits. Everyone is welcome, any age, color, size, gender, or religion. Message me if interested. And I took that post and I turned it into the book cover. I say I, we. this is a list of all, not all of, but the chronicles of the different faces. And these are the images inside the book that are both straightforward and creative and imagined, masked, made up, turned away, but a collection of real people, true selves, really demonstrating multiplicity in who they are, who we are, all through the lens of singularity. That's it. So I think about this a lot. How does one create for the complexity of individuals at a broad scale? How do I stop sharing? How do I, can I? Wait, what do I do? There.
There we go.
Hi guys. Sorry. Any questions?
Hi. I noticed that your work tends to cultivate these very like refined patterns. Like with the Kate Spade, the single icon created a pattern and in turn like kind of a set of guidelines for the brand itself. And this is something that we're working on in our branding class at the Portfolio Center right now. And so my question is, when you create a specific design language or a pattern for a brand, how do you go about defining the boundaries of that system and ultimately like knowing when to break the rules of the system that you've created?
I hate guidelines. I hate it for those reasons. Like you kind of want, when you create this stuff, and I was just talking to this, you want it to all make sense and you want a brand to be able to breathe, right? And to, what's happening in culture today might not be happening in culture tomorrow. And you want that identity to be able to evolve and be responsive. And so my kind of guidance there is, how do you use guidelines to inspire people to make versus restricting them of what they can't do. Like nobody wants to be told what not to do, but everybody wants to be inspired by what to do. So I recently did a set of guidelines for a client whereby I didn't create rules. We just designed a shit ton of stuff to inspire their teams and defined what typefaces they should be using. But like, I wanted them to be able to use all caps occasionally. I wanted them to be able to use, letter space type occasionally. I wanted them to have all the magic that typography can bring. So instead of saying it always has to be this way, we showed them ways in which we thought it looked good and told them why. And instead of saying you have to use this, this is what you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
I had a question for you. First of all, thank you for your time and presentation, Michael. It's super incredible. My question for you is, when you have your target audience and stuff, how do you connect with them? I feel like a lot of all your work across the board like really connects with your audience, and like we're all human beings. We all are connected in endless ways. Like we all want to be loved and we all have an inner child in us, but how do you go about connecting with your audience and like really hitting that soft spot with them?
One, I think that it's important in also talking about kind of the teams that I work with and the extended kind of families, if you will, is that strategy is an important part of what I do. I work at a strategy and design company right now, and their inputs and their research are super valuable. I do also think that it's important to do research beyond that. I want to know, you know, it's funny, I'm old, but I want to know what's popping, not only, you know, within the culture we're trying to reach or within culture more broadly. So I rely on research and image polling and watching films and really trying to understand what I need to do to connect authentically. Another thing that I take a great sense of pride in is around the inclusivity that I was actually able to do inclusivity work that I was able to do with Target. I think that, you know, hats off to them, but, you know, one of the first brands to kind of demonstrate, you know, that models weren't only a size 2, bringing diversity into the casting was of the utmost importance. Featuring disabled people in a way that made them see themselves in commercials was really, really important. And it's something that I want to continue to do in all of my work. So those are the things that we as creators can continually to think about and do to try and make sure that we're not creating within our own spheres of influence, that we really are trying to understand more broadly what's going on in the world. Did that make sense?
It did, thank you. I think as designers, we all naturally want to design for ourselves, or that's our natural instinct. So it's great to see how you are constantly thinking of how to design for not yourself.
And to know that if you take that back, I am designing for myself, but I'm designing for myself in the way that I want the work to be important and impactful and do good. And in order to do that, I can't design for myself. I know it's a little wonky, but yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much.
I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, I think the fact that you threw in I am old is something I can totally relate to, being somebody in a young industry. And on my third career, after years of working on the production side of, the filmmaking side of advertising, and now I've created a brand, and I want it to resonate. I want it to do good, and I've worked with strategists and thrown all kinds of money around in a startup, and have felt like everybody's all over the place. What advice can you give to me as a new brand who wants to have impact, and possibly, yes, I'd like to be inclusive of, we're sort of targeting, like my age group, the older demographic, not the millennials only and the Gen Zers, but we want to fill the white space for the brand that we're creating, which is a healthy drink, honey-based, using sustainably sourced, bee kept honey. We're beekeepers in our older age. So, I'm curious to hear what advice you might give coming from your side, which is now to the client side. I'm the client now. So anything that you might be able to.
So congratulations. I'm curious about your honey-based drink, and I love the fact that you keep bees. I think that the things that I think it's hard kind of being the brand versus seeing the brand. I think that I always tell my clients that they know their brand and what they want to be better, and that my job is to help bring that to life. And so on my end, I want to be listening, and I want to be making sure that on your end, you're being really clear and articulate as to this is the product, this is why it's good, this is the intended audience, but this is actually where we think the potential is. These are brands that we admire. Understand how those brands are communicating, maybe even saying these are some brands that we admire, but we think they go too far, trying to demonstrate that you have an understanding of the space that you're entering, and that you not only have a sense of the product itself. I think so many times, especially with entrepreneurs or kind of younger people, they're like, oh, I have this thing, this is what I want it to be, and basta. And it's like, and I think that you just have to put more around that to really be sure that who you're speaking to about it kind of is getting it.
Right, right. Clear messaging is really important. And I guess it's really hard to, when you are close to the product, it becomes your baby. And as all parents know, you can't be very objective about your kids. You're almost like the last to know about, or last to admit about what the faults may be, or things that you just don't want to see. So that's where external help and building a team is probably very valuable. But here, being able to be objective like that, I guess that's the training that I have to give myself more of. Yeah, it's interesting. I love what you said about creating the complexity of individuals on a broad scale is really tough.
Yep. But it isn't if you take all of the insights and bring it down to the singularity, and then begin to understand, that's your kind of, this has been a hard thing for me to articulate, because the singularity has to be multiplied to work in many different media and many different layers. So it is kind of this single thought, but it's quite stacked, and it's stacked not only by media, but by kind of audience and things like that. And I haven't been able to create this visual, and I'm kind of just talking it out right now with you guys for the first time. But I know that there's richness in this thought.
Yes. I'll have to think about it a little bit more, but I'll connect on LinkedIn, so you'll know more about
Coolness.
Thank you.
Hey, Michael, thank you so much for the chat. It really resonated. Can I ask you how you would define experience design?
You can. And so here's something is kind of, I feel like that what we do, whether it's in the experiential platform, in the 2D platform, in the video platform, wrong word, but whatever, medium, it's very, I look at it as all the same. I look at it as designing and problem solving, but I also look at these outputs like you're being a tour guide and you're taking somebody on an experience, or taking somebody on a journey. And I want to make sure that we're bringing people in. What are the right ways in which we're letting people know that we exist, and we're bringing them kind of into this space? How are we moving them through this space? And again, that could be a piece of printed material, a video, or a physical experience. What is the overarching kind of experience, feeling? What is the thing we want them to walk away with? And how do we kind of move them through that journey in a way that they leave feeling obviously with that thought, but with the desire to have a conversation about what they just experienced. So I think that the complexity of experience design has more to do with the physicality of it all, the surround, but I don't necessarily approach, and this is my experience, the ideation process that much differently than trying to get to that singular notion that can be expressed throughout the entire journey or built up through the entire journey. It is a performance, it is a novel, it is this kind of wondrous tour through kind of this abstract idea. Is that bullshitty or are you buying that?
No, I buy it. Who do you think in a role, the day-to-day, depending, obviously different teams and different agencies are built differently, but who do you think takes ownership of that process usually in your experience?
It's been different. I mean, it's very contentious at times, right? Like when I was at Mother, it started out, we just kind of ideated a few experiences and then we made them. And then all of a sudden we created an experience group. And then we thought, oh, do we need experience creatives? Or can we just use regular creatives? I think that ideas come from everywhere and anywhere. And relegating who can concept what and when can be very restrictive. I'm working on an experience project right now. I'm in a very small design group. I've created something, we're 10 people right now. And we're ideating the experiences ourselves. How you produce that is a whole other kind of ball of wax. But I think that if the insights and the ambition is right, then all kinds of creatives can tackle these problems. I think that sometimes the more experienced, experiential kind of creatives are less innovative or aren't always bringing kind of newness because they work within a singular space. So I prefer a kind of richer complexion of creatives tackling products so that we're making sure that we're innovating and creating newness every time. Did that make sense?
It did, and that resonated. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And Michael, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. I have a few questions, if it's okay, that I ask them all, but my first question I have is like, how do you define an idea?
I think that, how do I define an idea? For me, I'm going to say, and I think what you're getting at is the core idea that drives the campaign, or kind of, and how do I define that, or how do I know when I've got it?
I think both.
Well, I never know when I have it at the beginning. Sometimes I'm like pretty damn passionate. I think that for me, it's when it works again on many levels. When I can look at it from, will it drive an experience? Will it drive a campaign? How does it translate into social? Because nobody wants matching luggage, right? Nobody wants this thing that is just the same picture, same lines in every context. So what really lets me know when an idea is kind of rich and kind of solid is when you can almost, that idea generates 30 other ideas. And I think that we're always so trying to reduce that it's hard to remember that it needs to go back out again, that it needs to kind of be many things. Otherwise, it's short and it's dead and it's flat and it's old.
Sorry, I'm like writing all this down. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Second question was just, what was your like favorite, most impactful campaign or project that you have worked on?
I mean, the standard project that I showed you, the standard hotel project, is probably one of my favorite projects. And again, it's because of the cultural insight that drove to the idea, and it was just a moment in time when everybody was talking about the standard, and it just was this kind of fortuitous thing. Okay, I'll give you something. So there's a book by Benjamin and Astis, and the title of it is called An Underachiever's Diary. And the book cover, the original book cover, was all white, and at the very bottom, it just said, An Underachiever's Diary, Benjamin and Astis, in 12-point Helvetica. And that's one of my favorite projects.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then my last question, a lot of the work that you've created, that you've showed us, like incorporates a lot of like culture and shows a lot of diversity. Have you ever had it where like the thing that you created almost goes against like what ends up happening down the line with the company or the brand?
So have I ever had anything backfire?
Yes. And like, how do you deal with that if that has happened?
I mean, it's funny, I've had backlash. So it's funny, there was a spot that I wanted to put in here, a Latin spot that I did for Target Beauty that had Carmen Carrera, a trans model, as one of the kind of the lip syncers in the spot. And it was called out, and they were called out, and they were told to be boycotted by all of these right-wing Christian, groups for featuring a trans model. And it was also at the time where Target had made the decision to have all their restrooms be kind of open to however you identified. And it just blew up. And it was something that is really sad, frankly, right? You're doing something that you know moves society forward, and it just highlighted this thing that was like really, it created not just this thing, but this bathroom thing. Like Target was losing millions of dollars because of people boycotting because of their policy on restrooms, and then kind of punctuating it by putting a trans model into a Target commercial. And that's not really what you were asking, but that's when it really shows that what we can do for the world is powerful, and yet sometimes the world isn't ready to receive the things that we really believe in. And it's sad to know that that can have a negative impact on the brands that we work with.
Right. Do you like, how did Target like deal with all of that? Like after, like, do you know like what happened after, like how they dealt with the backlash?
I think that they stood their ground. I actually, you know what? I don't want to go too deep into that conversation because it's a lot around public relations and a lot around policy, and it's not an area that I feel comfortable as an authority speaking to.
Okay, right. Well, thank you so much. And this was a very inspiring talk, so thank you.
Michael?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to push into something you want to talk about, but related to that is you've spoken of culture as kind of a mass monolithic culture, which it is, and particularly if you're working on a national brand. But I'm going to say one trend that technology has allowed is for subcultures, the members of those subcultures, to connect either remotely or virtually, whereas in the past they had to go to a chess club or a gay bar or wherever they went to get together with like-minded people. And it seems like that technology trend, some people are threatened by the losing of their power, for example, some national publications, and the reaction has been censorship. And I just wonder your opinion, because I know you've given a lot of thought about this, in terms of the cancel culture, censorship, taking people off YouTube, Twitter. It seems like there's more opportunity for more ideas, which you encourage, and yet there's less tolerance than, I'm going to say, the free speech movement at Berkeley or any of the 60s or anything. It's ironic that Neil Young, who was of that let it all hang out generation, tried to censor Joe Rogan for having Robert Malone on. Anyway, your thoughts. And one question was, the standard fashion show, was that front projection or how did you do that?
Okay, two very different. The standard one's easy. There were LED lights placed in every room. We rented the whole South Side and we had performers in every room. So everything was inside out. The larger question around freedom of speech, around connecting to different cultures and subcultures, it's a big one. I believe in freedom of speech. I also believe that speech can be a weapon, and it can be evil. I think that there's the opportunity for brands and subcultures to connect more directly to audiences. And that's kind of what I wanted this talk to actually be. It's funny, you're bringing it full circle, is I actually believe that there's a way in which what we make and that multiplicity is really what I want to drive to. And the Target thing, although you didn't see all of the 90 little memes that we made, in some ways was meant to do that, was meant to be able to say, hey, this is the space that you're in, this is the space that you're in, and approach inclusivity, diversity, and kind of this notion of subcultures and many different subcultures, and be like, we recognize it and we recognize you. When it comes to the politics, I think it's pretty clear what my politics are, in that I want people to have voice, and I believe that that's really important. But I think that what's happening, I mean, I actually, it's a bad space. I'm not going to talk more broadly about that. No, it's just fucked up. I mean, frankly, it's like if people are, you know, inspiring people through fucking videos to like get guns and like become a fucking hero, we're like in a shit show right now. And so I don't know how to deal with the kind of the everybody needs a gun thing, everybody needs a voice thing, when in fact it's actually compelling people to do bad things to bad people. And that is making me cry right now. Sorry.
I have a question. So related to the work with Anscape, I was very interested, well, also Anscape and Target, when you're representing people from different backgrounds, different groups, how do you come together to create something that really exemplifies them? Like, how do you do your research for that?
One, I try to hire creative teams that represent those cultures. So for all of the Hispanic work that I did for Target, we created teams that weren't translating like English ads into Spanish speaking ads. We were actually working with Spanish speaking teams from different cultures, whether they be American Spanish speaking, Latin, like to try to make authentic references, because you can't, as a white person, speak to that culture authentically, or I can't. So I want to surround myself with teams who know those cultures. And similarly with the Andscape, it's entirely black creative team, entirely black production crew. And I make sure that the teams that I'm working with understand that. And I will say that it doesn't, it's like, so my job is to also find teams that are connected to part of the culture and not just trying to bite culture and mimic it, because that's when it becomes inauthentic. And I think that there's a real challenge to run an organization and make sure that you have the diversity to tackle all kinds of projects. And I think it just makes us work a little harder when we get something that we might not have the right talent inside to go outside and make sure that we're representing in the right way.
Okay, thank you. And also, I have another question really quickly. So kind of like following up a little bit. So since you have these big teams that you create and you have to come up with different concepts, you were talking earlier in, I think, answering someone else's question, that you don't want to restrict people around a certain idea, but at the same time, there comes a certain point in the campaign where you're like, after you've like generated your ideas and you kind of come up with a theme, that you're gonna like make something for that. But how do you keep it all, the train moving all in the same place without going, too often to too many directions? Like, keeping everybody unified without, being on top of their back, essentially.
Well, it's a complicated question, because I always am pondering how much unification versus how much kind of flexibility within both a system and within a campaign. But I think that part of it is like gut, right? And part of it is like, the how many layers can you build and have it all stick together? I don't think there's a formula, but I think that we just need to kind of be really mindful of those pieces. That's all I can say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
On the topic of organizing, I was really struck by how organized the mood boards and like your kind of like kit of parts for each process when you're showing it to us for each project. There's a mood board, I think it was like 11 slides in. It was the oh my gosh.
Landscape.
Yes. And is there like a specific process that you do to get like how do you do your mood boards? Because I always struggle with getting it all to look, to feel.
I love me some mood boards. Look at these people back there making mood boards. No, it's look, it's funny. There's recently an article in, I think, the AIGA thing about kind of how mood boards are evil. And they showed some mood boards and then what these brands had made, and they say, really, they're just ways of copying. And I didn't respond very well to that article because I thought they were crappy mood boards. And for me, a mood board is not just about a singular thought. It again is like curating kind of best in class imagery that's about an idea, not about a visual kind of conceit. I think mood boards suck when it's the same thing over and over again. Mood boards are amazing when it's about an idea or a concept, and it has photography and it has typography and it has, I don't know, physical spaces and fine art. It should not just be about other people's graphic design.
Okay. So do you usually, I'm trying to fine tune like my process, and do you ever like write out descriptor words and then go find images, or kind of like go with the flow, or it just doesn't, you just do it?
Sometimes, no, because sometimes a brand strategy already exists, right? And there might be some tonal words or some values that kind of exist, but it's also a feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, it is a feeling. And I think that, like, having a good sense of design history, having a good sense of art history, having a good sense of just kind of photography and kind of lighting and all of these things to parcel this apart. Because for me, a mood board should be palpable.
Right. I like that word, palpable. That's a good way to like get. Yes, I like that word.
and you know what? And I'll say I'm old again, but I like it physical. I think it's different if you're working in Miro or Figma or whatever. Like, I like to see it. I like them tacked up on a wall. I like every image the same size, and I want to evaluate and I want to move around. I find the experience of creating mood boards digitally kind of limiting. Just saying.
Yeah. Is the people behind you are doing it physically, I'm assuming.
Yes, we're back in the office. Actually, that's kind of a design board, but there are other mood boards, and we do it physically, and it's one of the things that really has driven my work and my process.
Awesome, thank you.
I had a question. Thank you so much for this talk. It's like planted a whole bunch of seeds in my head. And one of the things that I have been thinking about, so you mentioned like how important it is to you to do good. And I guess, do you have advice for us as like young designers going into the industry? Because it's real, like I've been thinking a lot about like, don't know if I can articulate this correctly, but the balance between making good design and like doing what your like a company needs, and also maintaining your own, like being responsible about what you put out into the world, especially like you said, like what you put out, like your designs are the singularity that then becomes, you know, a multiplicity again and affects culture, like design affects culture. So I guess just do you have recommendations for designers for how to be responsible?
Yep. Look, I mean, we all, am I still on camera? We all need gigs, right? And we all want to do good work. And not every place is going to have either ethics or the projects that align with all of our checklists. And I think we have to, in our minds, understand, you know, what our priorities are. Some of the places that do work solely for good might not, in some ways, do the caliber of design or design thinking that you want to be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the places that do the design thinking might be more commercially minded, or are not necessarily about kind of the doing good part. They're just about the work part. And then there are places that are a mix of that. And really it's about priorities. And, you know, I've been super, super fortunate. And I've also made a few fuck ups. There's a story that I tell about, I don't know how many years ago, but I worked on the rebranding of BP, the oil company, when they changed from the shield to the flower. And I was part of the team that actually didn't create the logo, but I created the campaign. And it turned out that it was fucking greenwashing. And there was a big oil spill like 5-10 years later. They still have their sunshiny logo. What I take away from that is I probably will never work for another petroleum company again. At the same time, the work that we did was all about a company being transparent, a company trying to do good. And although it was insincere for that company, that work propelled a lot more businesses to be what's called radically transparent about kind of how they operate, what standards they hold themselves to, and communicate more clearly. So although the work that I did was probably a little bit like wonky, it actually had influence on culture in a positive way. And so you might not even make the right choice. But I think it's about knowing what you want and really being able to clearly articulate that, and then figuring out whether that's a match given the priorities at that moment in time. I think that, you know, what I love about working here and working with Alain is that the premise for the whole organization is around this idea of progress that creates impact. And so we can define that how we want, but it really is core to who we are.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, and I with the BP thing, like you said that, you know, the company was not being sincere, but it seems like your work and the work that you did with other people was sincere, and then that's what culturally resonated. Like you
drove other, yeah.
We're good. You just were maybe in the wrong place for those intentions.
No, what was the wrong? I mean, the work went out into the world. It changed the way people communicated. It was a little bit of like bullshit for that particular brand, but I think the impact that the work had more impact than it did. Well, yes. Sorry.
But anyway, thank you. That's super helpful. It's just definitely something, you know, I think about a lot. So I appreciate it.
Cool.
Okay, guys, are we good here? You guys are like taking Michael's dinner time away from him, I think. But but man, what a passionate group of folks listening to this, and what he has to say and what he has to share. Michael, thank you so much for coming and doing this. Always amazing what you say. And you know, I think a good presentation is tomorrow morning when you wake up, and these ideas of rolling, and you've been prodded and they're rolling over in your head and you can't let go. And you've done that, I think, for these guys today, this young group. Can they get in touch with you or in touch with someone in the company?
For sure. I mean, one via LinkedIn, two via Coco would be the best way to kind of get a hold of me.
Yeah, so we can, I think some of them had to hop off, but we can send Coco's. Yeah. What is it? Coco at what?
Coco at Gmail. I mean, Coco at sylvain.co.
Okay. Hopefully, yeah.
COCO at Sylvain, SYLVAIN.co.
I think you really touch the inner part of this guy's passions today. And that's, you know, what's really cool about what you did is you won't even know who you inspired, but somebody from here is going to go out and do something with what you said. It's pretty cool.
Well, that was the purpose of this, and that makes me happy. It's weird doing all of this virtually and not kind of in where you're actually like looking at faces. It's hard to know whether you're actually connecting or not. So I'm assuming by the amount of questions and things like that, that there was that, and I'm happy to participate.
Thank you so much. And thank everybody for coming today.
Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. My name is Tyler. I'm going to be one of the admissions advisors helping you guys to start your creative careers here with the Miami Ad School with our 4 portfolio programs: art direction, copywriting, photography and video, and design, as well as our boot camps. We are well equipped to make you well equipped for the creative industry. And my job is to help you transition smoothly from prospective to enrolled student. We have financial aid and scholarships available for all of our portfolio programs, and our 4 U.S. locations, Miami, Atlanta, San Francisco, and New York, as well as our international locations, are ready for you guys to go ahead and enroll when you are ready. So feel free to go to our website, www.miamiadschool.com, hit apply now, start your application, and if you have any questions, set up a call, and we will be happy to help you.